You do you.
Yeah, I'll do me. Yeah. To call the October 10th Kankakee County full board meeting to order, the invocation with Mr. McConnell, please.
Father, we read in your word in 2 Chronicles that my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek thy face and turn from their wicked ways. Then I will hear from heaven, will forgive their sins and heal their land. Father, this morning we do come before the throne of grace humbly. We do come boldly, seeking your face. Father, we pray that you would heal our land. Father, the evilness in our land, the viceness in our land. Father, your hand would be upon us. We thank you for your grace in the form of Jesus Christ. Father, this morning I do pray for our board, that you give us great wisdom to deal with the things that we have to deal with. Father, would be given compassion. And Father, I do pray for our first responders and defenders, the people that have defended our country, so we have this privilege of gathering together to debate, to discuss the issues. So I pray for a hedge of protection around all those service people and all those people that are defending us, that you would give them a hedge of protection, protect them throughout this day and throughout this year. So Father, I do pray for wisdom now as we deal with the things we deal with. I pray in Christ's name.
Amen. If you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Alrighty, Mr. Clark is in Kyrgyzstan?
On his way to Kyrgyzstan
to help monitor an election. Yeah, close, very close. So we have a special guest today to help do the roll call, Mr. Dan Hendrickson.
Mr. Tripp.
Present.
Mr. Washington.
Present.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Hess. Mr. Tholen. Mrs. Polk. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Scott. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne.
Present.
Mr. Seroy.
Present.
Mr. Lear.
Present.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Present.
Mrs. Weber. Mr. Einfeld.
Present.
Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton.
Present.
Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter.
Present.
Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Duda. Mr. Wheeler.
Present. We have a quorum. And no public commentary today. Looking out there. No communications and presentations. We have a recognition of Russ Belcher. If we could, do we have to read that into the record, please?
There's someone here.
I know, but they didn't send it in. Oh, do you have it with you, Mr. McHugh? All right, if you would, please come on up over here to the microphone. Apologize, I thought we had sent that in to be made a full-on proclamation, so. If you could enter into the microphone and then please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nate McHugh. I'm the current Director of Student Support Services for Kankakee School District and the former principal for our alternative school for Kankakee School District. Besides me is Officer Russ Belcher and Dr. Greg Murphy. We're here today. I'd like to present an award to Officer Belcher for his years of service that he did with us while he was at the alternative school. Not a lot of people know that when you take on the role of a school resource officer, you take on a different role than when you're in patrol. And that can be difficult for some officers at sometimes, but Officer Belcher just exemplified what we look for in a school resource officer. Through his years with us, he really acted as a mentor, as a coach, literally, and as a chess coach for our students. I think the one thing I was the most impressed with over the years was his ability to change the perception of local law enforcement with our students. We had a very difficult population, and he really changed the role and educated, and day in and day out just was an absolute service to our students. So for that, I'd like to thank him for his years of service and present him with this award.
Do you have anything, Greg? Anything to add?
If I could, while Russ's tenure as a resource officer is notable, we would be here today regardless because of the way that Russ conducts himself as an officer, a professional, and a caring adult with the students in our programs. I don't know that everyone understands the relationship that you have with the students and what that does for the greater community. So with that, I also want to say thank you very much for your service and the time that you spent with our kids. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. I already mentioned it. We have the, I guess, uncomfortable and unfortunate situation of declaring a vacancy and having the board discuss that in a county board district. So in your packet, you'll see the third page in here is a letter from 911 that explains the situation, but I'll kind of give you an overview of what had happened. We had a vacancy in District 6. We found a very viable candidate and somebody who would have added to this board tremendously. And we expected that situation to bear fruit over the next years that Mr. Duda could have served on this board. There were questions about where his home actually was located within the structure of the districts. And on 5 occasions, I actually look back, I had to ask the clerk's office, okay, are we sure he's in District 6? Because he lives on the north side of the road. And kept coming back each time, and Dan was part of these conversations, and so was Bruce Clark. In the voter records, the north side of that road was showing being in District 6. We even had the state's attorney's office take a look at it. They inquired with the clerk, and that was the answer we got repetitively over and over again, even though there were some things that seemed a little odd. And I don't know what stemmed to me coming downstairs one day when we looked at a separate level that we would have never thought that there would have been an issue with, was the way 911 had mapped the area. And I don't know, what was that, 30 years ago, 911 mapped the county for addresses? It's been a while. As far as we can tell, this is the only house, because we've looked, that this is affected, where I believe the south side of the road is even numbers.
Correct.
And then the north side is odd numbers. Mr. Doodle lived on the north side, but they gave him an even number. And so when you load things into the computer, it's set to look at that parameter because that's the way that it works. And so every time that the clerk's office the county clerk's office would look in there, it said, it goes through DevNet, it goes through all of our systems that it was in the district. Turns out he's not. And so we have to come back here and as a board vote to declare a vacancy in that office because of this. So, as I will say that it is completely my fault. I should have done this when I had larger questions, but it seemed that was the case. So, and it wasn't, this was the only house, but still, that's just the way that it is. So, beyond that, I guess if there's any questions, but I would need a motion to declare a vacancy in County Board District 6. Ms. Peters, Mr. Einfeld, is there any other questions, comments from the board? Do we need a roll call on this? I think it's just a voice vote. Yeah. I guess all those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed. And I'd like to send my personal apology, as I have. I can't do it enough to Mr. Duda. That was more than unfortunate. So Moving on. Certificates of recognition. Linda Mackin, 10 years in human resources.
Watch it, watch it, watch it.
There's a lunch. Moving on, the minutes of the last meeting, I need a motion to approve. Mr. Olthoff, second. Mr. Washington, all those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Claims Committee report, August 2017.
Mr. Chairman and members of the County Board, your Committee on County Claims would beg leave to report they've examined the following claims presented and recommend payment. The clerk is hereby authorized and directed to issue orders to the several claimants payable out of the funds as follows. The Highway Fund, $350,190.62. All other funds, $1,208,802.14, for a total for the month of August 2017 of $1,558,992.76. And for the general fund, $1,084,782.91, and all other funds, $3,590,361.89, total for the month of August 2017, $4,675,144.80.
Can I get a motion to approve? Ms. Parker, second. Mr. Byrne. There'll be a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington. Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Scott. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Reinfeldt. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Department reports. I need a motion to combine and accept the reports. Mr. Seroy, second. Mr. McConnell, if we could read those into the record, please.
To the Honorable County Board of Kankakee County, your committee to whom was referred the County Collector's Monthly Report for August 31st, 2017. Total cash in bank and investments, $44,792,645.48. The County Treasurer's Monthly Report for the month of August 2017. Total checking accounts and cash, $10,248,043.97. The General Fund, negative $5,668,627.18. Coroner's Monthly Report for August 2017, 106 total calls, 19 coroner's cases, 10 autopsies, 10 toxicology, 2 outside autopsies, 1 donation, 0 indigents, 1 x-ray, 60 cremations. And the income report for 2017 for the coroner, total of $4,933. Circuit Clerk's Monthly Report for August 2017, total dispersed $312,813.03. The Recorder's Monthly Report for August 2017, disbursement fees paid to the County Treasurer of $111,419.88. County Clerk's Report for August 2017, total of $26,307.90. Animal Control Report for August 2017, total of $17,265. In the IPTIP Building Fund, $130. The Monthly Building Report for July 2017, Total permits, 77 issued. In fees, $17,796. Total extra fees of $1,800 for a total of $19,596. The monthly resolution list for October 2017 totaled the county $24,852.39.
We had a motion and a second. I guess all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to consent agenda. Is there anything that needs to be removed from the consent agenda? Mr. Legess?
Chairman, I'd like to pull off the second item, 127, just for some information purposes.
Sure. Anything else, Mr. Snipes?
And then I want to remove or take off 137 just for clarification.
Okay, is there any others, Mr. Vickery? Motion to approve, is there a second? Mr. Mulcahy? All those in favor? Actually, that's a roll call, I apologize. Do we have to read those into the record and then a roll call vote?
Okay.
We have to read them in and then roll call.
The predictable fee schedule for the county recorder's office, declaration and disposal of surplus and unwanted equipment for the Kankakee County Maintenance Department, ZBA case 1705, variance to section 121-285, fence height in the C2 General Commercial District, appointment of David Wolf to the Kankakee Township Fire Protection District Board, appointment of David Hinderleiter to the Metro Board of Directors, appointment of Dr. Peter R. Radulovich to the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission, reappointment of Steve Engelking to the Kankakee River Conservancy District, order of succession in the event of a disaster, increasing the number of members of the Ethics Commission from 3 to 5, the adoption of additions and deletions to the county code related to the county's Ethics Commission, and creation of the Juvenile Justice Council.
All righty, so we need a roll call, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Legess.
Aye.
Mr. Stauffenberg.
Aye.
Mr. Vickery.
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy.
Aye.
Mr. Scott.
Aye.
Mr. Snipes.
Aye.
Mr. Byrne.
Aye.
Mr. Seroy.
Aye.
Mr. Lear.
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand.
Aye.
Mrs. Weber.
Aye.
Mr. Einfeld.
Aye.
Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton.
Aye.
Mrs. Parker.
Aye.
Ms. Dunbar.
Aye.
Mr. Ritter.
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger.
Aye.
Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. Moving on to 127. If we could, let's read that one into the record. I think, is that kind of where we're going, Mr. Lejesh? I think that's, okay. Making you work for it today.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, a resolution declaring a portion of Armour Road, County Highway 44, the honorary street name of Sergeant Will Lewis Way in the village of Bradley. Whereas the County Board of the County of Kankakee has the authority to name or change the name of any road in the county highway system under its jurisdiction according to 55 ILCS 5/5-1067, and whereas Armour Road, also known as County Highway 44, is under the jurisdiction of the County of Kankakee east of Illinois Route 50, and whereas Sergeant Wilford Ray Will Lewis, a police officer, gave his life in the line of duty on November 20th, 1997, while serving on the Bradley Police Department where he had served for 22 years. And whereas it has been requested to declare an honorary road name to a segment of highway located in the village of Bradley, which is under the jurisdiction of the County of Kankakee. And whereas the Highway and Buildings Committee of the Kankakee County Board did consider and approve this resolution at their regularly scheduled meeting on September 14th, 2017. Now therefore be it resolved, the County of Kankakee declares Armour Road County Highway 44 between Lock Drive and Cardinal Drive, located in the village of Bradley, be honorably named Sergeant Wilford Ray Lewis Drive. Be it further resolved that the village of Bradley be permitted to erect at suitable locations consistent with state and federal regulations the appropriate signs giving notice of the honorary name.
So first I would need a motion to approve. Mr. Legess, a second. Mr. Tholen? Yes, Mr. Legess.
As the resolution read, it's the 20th anniversary of Will Lewis's death in the line of duty for the Bradley Police Department. First, I'd like to introduce the Chief of Police in Bradley, Mr. Mike Johnston.
Right, back there. That microphone.
The chief and Lori Gadboys, who's a trustee, spearheaded this effort to name a section of Armour Road in Will's honor as the 20th anniversary. And the fact that we never want to forget that Will Lewis gave his life in the line of duty for the citizens of Bradley and the citizens of this county. The actual street will run from Lock Drive, which is where Steak and Shake is, to Armour Road, going east down to Armour Road at the light there. And at this time, Cardinal. I'm sorry. At this time, I would like to introduce Lori Lewis, Will Lewis's widow. Lori? That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Oh,
when I got this
last
call-
thing.
go ahead.
One last thing. If you notice, Chief Johnston's limping a little bit. He ran in the Chicago Marathon and actually finished. Yeah.
wow. So we do have a motion and a second, I believe, and that would be a voice vote. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to 137, increasing the minimum bid accepted at the annual public auction. Can we waive the reading? And if would you like it read in the record, or we just waive the reading and ask your question?
You can wait reading.
Okay.
Yeah, just want to clear. The purpose of bringing this to the attention is to kind of inform the public. Sometimes I know they can look at the podcast, but then sometimes they don't, or whether they kind of view the Kankakee County Board's podcast to see what the general meeting is. So I want it just elucidated a little bit to, or in brevity, to say why we are raising it to the 750, and kind of giving that little information, because I know it was in the past it was 100, then it was 200, then it's and we're not just doing it haphazardly, but in all actuality, we're kind of losing in the process. So as a result, if you can do that, that'd be appreciated.
Well, yeah, we and thank you. We discussed this in finance, or not we. I wasn't here. I was out of town, but I believe this was discussed. And Dick, I don't know if you have input in on this. It's Africano. We talked about this as a group, a working group with the county trustee, and we started comparing what we do as a county versus what other counties are doing, and then also the I want to say the amount of money we actually do lose on these situations, especially when there's a sale in error. So Nick, I don't know if you want to elaborate on all of that, but
I guess the only thing I'd like to say is 750 seems to be where most counties are going. No one's higher than that. The people that are lower at 600, we haven't had a raise since 2007. And it just seemed to us, Andy was in the working group. We had a state's attorney's member in the working group and the clerk's office. It just seemed that as the times have changed, it made sense to raise it $150. That would have, the difference that would have made this auction would have been about $6,000. Because I think there were 49 properties that sold at minimum bid. Somewhere in there.
Also, just one thing, I don't want to use the word raise like we getting a raise. It's just that it was justifiable based upon observation of the finance committee in this process. The reason I bring it up is because a lot of individuals are saying a lot of properties not selling in Kankakee. They're there at 600 and they're staying there, however. But we do know that individuals do buy up, and so therefore we're trying to get the properties off of our shoulders back on the tax rolls because we don't make the money if there's no owner to the property. So as a result, the purpose is to keep it fair, firm, and consistent across the board. Thank you.
Ms. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When it was discussed at Finance, I brought this up too, and I know Nick and I had a conversation about it. I have no problem with raising the minimum bid to $750 on those properties that have improvements on them, because clearly a lot of the ones that do have improvements did sell. But of the 149 properties that sold, I believe less than 5 of them were empty lots in the city of Kankakee. And if we're not getting bidders at $600, we're certainly not going to get bidders at $750 on those empty lots to try to improve those properties. And I asked the question at Finance whether we could have 2 separate prices, one for empty lots and 2 separate minimums, one for empty lots and one for improved properties. My fear is that if we raise it to $750, the price for those empty lots will never go back down. Because how often do we lower something? So I don't have a problem raising it to $750 for improved lots, improved properties, but I do have a problem raising it for empty lots, particularly my district in particular. I had 1 lot sell out of 30, I believe, that were in the auction.
Is there any other comment? Any other questions? Any other thoughts? Mr. Legesse?
I don't remember in Finance if it was decided that you could not have 2 separate bids.
No.
We were going to look into it.
Yeah, I
The
think
treasurer said he'd look into it. I don't know if you found out anything.
I think what we need to do is here's the properties that sell for 600 will sell for 800, would sell for 900, would sell for 750. Those properties that don't sell at 600, there are reasons they don't sell. We discussed this at Finance briefly, and I think maybe we need to find creative solutions to what Ms. Dunbar said. I think that's obviously a problem. But for instance, in Limestone, there was a subdivision that didn't sell. Beautiful lots, $600 a piece, they didn't sell, but there's a backstory on many of these properties that don't sell for $600.
Agreed.
I don't want to count anybody's money for them, but certainly a lot for $600 is almost as cheap as you can get. And when they don't get a bid on them, there are reasons that doesn't happen. We may need to find creative solutions to figure out how to turn those over to someone, if that's legal, to put them back on the tax rolls. I don't believe the 750, personally, I don't believe it's going to have any change on the amounts that sell. But I do agree with Ms. Dunbar that maybe we should look at a way, and I don't think it's just bid price. Because if you took those $600 properties down to 400, would they sell? Some of those properties that Ms. Dunbar references have been in the trustees' hands for many, many years. And remember, there was about 440 properties that sold. I mean, that were offered. I think we sold 150 roughly.
49.
So some of these are carryovers for many, many, many years. And maybe it takes a creative solution to figure out how to get them back on the tax rolls. I don't think the 600 is the hurdle, though, in my mind.
Thank you. I will say, and I recall this conversation that we had when we were discussing this with the working group, and the county trustee handles, I think, 98% of the counties in Illinois. And we asked the question, will this have a negative impact? And their opinion was they've never seen it. The $150 was so negligible, they didn't see it make a turn in any way, shape, or form. And I don't know if you recall that we talked about it for maybe 5 minutes to make sure that we wouldn't negatively impact. And it was to what Nick's point was that $150 on a lot is not the reason it's not selling. And I understand the concern, but in that case, maybe we do need to get inventive and figure out a way to get these off of the unvalued list, if you will, because nobody's finding value in it. Mr. Scott, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know the city of Chicago probably about a year ago did something where the lots they'd sell for $1 in a raffle. If people who lived within a certain vicinity had like a residency on that block, if they could put their name in and get that lot for $1. My question is, in order to get these properties back into the hands of the public, is that something that could be feasible? And if so, where would that have to be initiated?
It's a legitimate question. I would say that
Look into that. We can research how they did that.
yeah, we can take a look at it. I mean, because
City did
obviously
it,
we'd have
yeah.
to work with
Right by
the
United
cities.
Center.
Yeah, the municipality, this is, I don't know if we have dominion to do a lot of those things, but I think it's a worthwhile conversation.
They're home rule.
Yes, they are. I
So
know
they
that.
can do a lot more that we can.
Yes.
We're restricted and you have to sell a property for a certain percentage of the assessed value of the property.
have
or
to.
the value of the property.
Okay.
So, but there's probably some leeway there.
Is the city, because could the city of Kankakee take over? Are they they are home rule,
If
correct?
if they own those properties, they could sell them. Yeah. But right now, these are properties that the county has for failure to pay property taxes.
Okay.
Yeah, the trustee has.
Okay,
Correct.
understood.
And that represents all taxing districts. I want to take the opportunity to mention that. It's just not the county who is owning these properties. The county trustee, which
Yes.
is our third party, handles that for all taxing districts, which we are probably the smallest part of, I would imagine, on most cases. School district's number one, usually. So,
Understood. I just
yeah.
didn't know if we could even maybe turn them over to the local municipalities in any way.
I think it's a worthwhile conversation.
All right.
It would, now, as we move forward in this, but the sidebar would be, why don't we refer it to finance for that discussion? I think it's worthwhile to pursue something like that. Mr. Legess?
Offer the vacant lots to the municipalities before they're put in the book.
Yeah, they can pull them off that list for the minimum bid.
So Kankakee would actually see those lots beforehand, and if they wanted to pull them off and work with builders.
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think we had this come up. I don't think.
We did have this come up. It's, they can't pull them off for minimum bid. There was a situation that Hopkins Park wanted to pull one off for minimum bid.
20 years.
And the trustee called us and that was rejected because the potential was the property would sell for 24,000 and the minimum bid was 600. So because there's a responsibility to all taxing bodies.
We just lost all microphones here. We need to check that real quick. Being silenced.
Air daily.
We'll break it worse. All right. As long as they can hear it in there, it'll be recorded. We're fine. We just may have to speak up so everybody can hear it in the room. So was there any other questions on 137? We had a motion and a second. Ms. Dunbar.
Welcome some kind of creative solution and we have to.
Okay. Mr. Scott?
Does this not go into effect until next auction, and when is that? Is this something
It's a year. It's a year from now. Yeah.
So could we table the resolution, or what would be the recommendation?
It would be my recommendation to do this because at least that's why we met and we talked and we worked through this, was to actually get it on the books at 750, and then we could come up with other inventive ways. Because as we mentioned, it wasn't in the group and outside of the group, it wasn't going to deter people. That $150, the value is there. So, Mr. Snipes.
I would be interested in seeing what the city has available to avoid the person in the tax book.
Did we get a motion in a second? These don't work.
Personally, so they will not
Kevin's trying to.
able to build on
No,
the
we
property.
didn't.
There must be something that they can do. Because I know the city of Kankakee has done it on Skyler, the Skyler property.
I would say because it's been done doesn't make it right. And that's kind of what we recently looked into, and we got the statutes, and we actually we'll have a full explanation. I think it's a good idea to talk about that at finance, because the situation did come up recently, and so we had to do a deep dive into the record. Mr. Duval, first, you need to get through? You're okay. Okay, it's just we can't in here. Okay. Yeah. Okay. You can hear it on the stream. We just can't hear it in the room, like on the microphone. So, all right. So did I get a motion? I don't think so. I need a motion. Oh, Nick, sorry, go ahead.
It's in everybody's best interest, not just the county, all taxing bodies, to get these back on the tax rolls. So,
Okay. So let me turn this back on. Do I have a motion for this, for 137? Mr. Siroy, second. Mr. Kinzinger. So we can do, we're not spending money at this point. It can be a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, noted. Mr. Snipes, you missed that mark. Okay, moving on. Our PZA, we had a resolution authorizing the county board chairman to execute the IPW MAN agreement. If we could just waive the reading and just read the full title into the record, please. Thank you.
Resolution of the County Board of Kankakee County, Illinois, a resolution authorizing the county board chairman to execute the Illinois Public Works Municipal Aid Network, IPW MAN agreement for highways under the jurisdiction of the county of Kankakee.
So I need a motion to approve first. Mr. Hildebrand, second. Ms. Peters. We kind of discussed this in PZA at length, but is there any questions about what this is? Mark Rogers is here. He can explain it a little bit, but basically we're part of a mutual aid network. We won't spend money unless there's a disaster that we're called to help out another county. Something happens here, they come out and help us. So it's basically the way we had insurance questions, we had all of those answered. So we're pretty much, we're locked in on that. Mr. Olthoff. I think it was actually. Did it have to go to the ZBA? It was highway. It's not PZA. Yeah, it was highway. Yeah, it's not under PZA. Yeah. Highway. Yeah, you are correct. So any other questions about that? It needs to be a roll call because we're not spending money, but we might. So roll call vote.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg.
Aye.
Mr. Vickery.
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Scott. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Einfeld. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye, motion carries. Moving on to a finance resolution. Need a motion to approve and waive the reading of the resolution. Ms. Parker, Mr. Tripp. Any questions about the levy this year? We discussed it in finance, I was told. I've seen video. But basically, this is one of the first years we're able to adjust things a little bit. We're able to, we're tax capped. A lot of people are happy with that in the county. It was voted in, but the one of those limitations is that we sometimes can't capture, the type of revenue that we need to for county services. This is one of the first years that we've seen some upticks in the CPI that allows us to capture that. So beyond that, any questions, comments? Need a roll call vote, please.
Mr. Tripp.
Aye.
Mr. Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Legess. Mr. Stauffenberg. Mr. Vickery. Mr. Olthoff. Mr. Tholen. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Mulcahy. Mr. Scott. Mr. Snipes. Mr. Byrne. Mr. Seroy. Mr. Lear. Mr. Hildebrand. Mrs. Weber. Mr. Einfeld. Mrs. Peters. Mrs. Evans. Mr. Payton. Mrs. Parker. Ms. Dunbar. Mr. Ritter. Mr. Kinzinger. Mr. Wheeler.
Aye. Motion carries. In other business, we have one opening on the Kankakee County Board of Health, 2 openings on the Kankakee County Regional Planning Commission, 2 openings on the Kankakee River Conservancy District Board, 6 openings on the Board of Examiners and Appeals, engineer, architect, commercial contractor, residential contractor, electrician, and plumber. These, we just announced that they're all openings because everybody reapplies each time, that we just like to see that they're still interested in doing this. One opening on the Juvenile Justice Council, and that's an appointment from this board. Want to remind that this is a working position. I was reminded of that by our state's attorney. This isn't a parade waving type of board appointment. This is something that they'll be having.
Those ribbon cutting.
Yeah, it's not ribbon cuttings. Sorry, we're not going to step in your turf. There will be retribution, I'm sure, for that one.
Press release right now.
Yeah, exactly. But no, this is one where you're going to be working with students, troubled students, working with different schools to build out a program, and it's actually a wonderful idea, and we look forward to it taking shape. So, if anyone is interested, know somebody that would be great for this position. Obviously, fill out the application type thing. We want to make it fair and above board for everybody. So, do you have any comments about the commission?
My hope is that the commission will at least spend the first year or two focusing on truancy. We don't see many people come into the third floor of the courthouse for criminal cases that have high school diplomas or higher. It's because they're dropping out of school before they get into the truant activity, like the drugs, the gangs, the violence. So I think if we can get a handle on truancy in the county by working with Dr. Murphy, Regional Office of Ed, his truancy officers, and do what we can do from the government and courts side of things, we can probably make a big impact on crime reduction countywide in the long term. So that's my hope of what that commission will focus on.
Thank you. So again, if you know anybody, Mr. McConnell.
I addressed this in our other meeting, but the 6 openings on the board of examiners, I really would like to see the heating, ventilation, air conditioning contractor added to that, because the heating and air conditioning is the heart of the building, and it's not addressed. And being a code enforcement officer, I see a lot of problems.
So when and you have to forgive me because I don't know who sets these. I don't know what the criteria is, if it's a state statute that calls for these types or if it's a county code, but we'll look into it, okay? If we need to make it one more, I see your reasoning, I don't disagree. And I think most people would say we don't want to exclude a key trade, one that's typically associated with such.
For your heat and air conditioning, what else do you have besides plumbing, electrical?
So we'll look into it. I want to make sure that we're following the code, and whose ever code it is. If it's our county code, we established it, we can change it. If it's a state, can't change it. So I'll let you know. I don't think it would be either, but I just want to make sure. Yeah. So I'll look into that.
Thank you.
Yep. So moving into old business, this is something that we brought up in a meeting before. Just mentioned that we were going to go out to bid on our work comp, which we haven't done. And since I've been on the board, we have never looked at that workers' comp insurance. We've never bid it out. We've never had it brought to us on a bid. And I don't, we've always talked about liability and the huge cost. Our work comp, I believe, is around $600,000 a year. Please don't quote me on that, but I think that's the number we're talking. That's a lot of money every year we pay our work comp insurance without having it bid out. And so what I want to do is I want to leverage. We may not change. We have a great company, and I've talked with Lynn Mackin about this. We have a great work comp company that does a lot for us, IPMG. But you always have to check to keep people honest, especially in the insurance business. So we want to make sure that we're doing this the right way. Now, part of the issue is that this was never brought to us with solutions. So what I'm asking is I actually want to have the broker that handles our liability insurance actually go out to bid for us and look at the market. That's what I'm asking the board to do. I wouldn't just arbitrarily do a broker of record change, but usually when you have a relationship with a broker, they're coming to you with solutions, and I have yet to see ours in the 4 years or 5 years that I've been associated with the board on this issue. So I'm asking this board, is it okay if I execute a broker of record letter change to have one consultant work with us to go to all the markets? And so I'll leave it to the will of the board, and if there is a motion, we'll take it and we'll talk about it, and we can go from there.
You need a motion?
Yes. Mr. Legess, Mr. Payton. Discussion. Does anybody have any input in this? Oh, we got one. Yeah. Go ahead.
So you would be executing a broker of record change letter, changing the broker from who to who?
It would go from, I believe it's under Pierce, Persack, or Gilmore. It's Gilmore. I don't know how they title their company, but it's Gilmore Insurance, to George Ryan Jr. Insurance, who handles our liability. Now, we're not changing companies, we're bidding it out. And so we may stick with IPMG, but I need someone to check the market, and I need them to be proactive. So we're already in the process of gathering the information. We haven't got loss runs. I had to ask for loss runs. I haven't heard boo about this, and had requested things in the past. So this is why I'm saying I think we need to take a look at the service level we were getting on this, especially for something that is so much money. Commissions are disclosed, so it won't cost more. That by law, all commissions are disclosed. So the board will know what we paid before in commission and what we're doing currently. So, Mr. Stauffenberg, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Is there some reason you want to change brokers? Because I think before you came, we did have Gilmore shop it around to get us a better rate at one time. That might have been 10, 15 years ago by now. Mm-hmm. And he can do the same thing. So I don't know why you're actually wanting to switch brokers.
My feeling as a customer is that we weren't treated as a customer. Usually every year when I was in the business, we would go bring solutions to our clients. And my phone hasn't rang since I've been here. And I don't know that it has rang the whole time that I've been on the board. It may have. I just have to, and it's not a personal thing. It's more like the service level we get for the amount of money we spent. Mr. Scott.
What did George Ryan Insurance switch to them for our liability, correct?
Right.
What type of savings did we encounter when we switched to them for liability? It was pretty significant, correct?
$600,000,
Yeah,
and they
so
brought those solutions to us.
They brought those solutions to us proactively.
Right.
And I'm of the same mindset as you as a customer. That broker is supposed to be a representative of this board, of this taxpayers. So, I mean, I'll take you on your word that he hasn't called you since you've been chairman. So I'm fine with issuing a change of broker.
And that doesn't mean, by the way, that business can't be earned back. This isn't like, for the rest of our lives, If we find that, and this has, happened to me before, I've lost business when I was doing it and then got it back a year later when the grass wasn't greener, so I will say, but it's who do I want to manage the process? Somebody that's hungry and is going to look under every rock, or somebody I haven't heard from, so just Mr. Snipes.
I know that as a customer, it's probably in what I consider to be operating good faith to kind of call your customer, but have we called them as well to see if there were anything out there, or whether or not we could, because I'm a person, I stay as local as long as it's someone in Kankakee. However, if there's something out there, I'm not saying not look at it or whatever, but just for the purpose of moving, I want to see that if, are we benefiting any greater if we move? So if we look at those numbers, they would also have the opportunity to look at those numbers and will it go out to bid, or if they can match it. How are we doing that?
The way insurance works is that the insurance companies provide a number, and so all the bids will be the same. Basically, what you're doing is you're deciding who's going to get the commission. Is it somebody that you feel is doing the work for you as a county? And there may be things in the background, and I know there are things in the background on work comp that you have to do. But to your specific question, when I requested all of our loss runs for the 5 years, that triggers a communication between the insurance company and the broker. And the broker knows that I was starting to shop on my own, and I still didn't get a phone call. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So indirectly, that's the way it works. When one of your clients has requested loss runs that they are shopping. And so that would have been 2 months ago I waited. I said, okay, we'll this next 2 months. Mr. Stauffenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. As I recall,
So whenever we did shop this, that we had such a terrible loss ratio and mod that we couldn't move. It might be advantageous for us to ask our current carrier what our mod is, which is, placed by the NCCI off of the claims you've had. We could have such a high mod that it's not gonna be any advantage to shop, and then maybe we don't, I don't know.
Right.
I have not seen anything in many years either. So.
Yeah. The one thing I will mention is that we do, IPMG, all these acronyms confuse me, I apologize.
Yeah.
IPMG handles work comp and ICRMT handles our liability. You can see how I could jumble those up. It's alphabet soup. But then when ICRMT also offers work comp, and you can get multi-line discounts, especially on that volume.
Sure.
So we're going to try to leverage that with the current company, and plus look at other companies out there. And these are plans that you talk about and strategies that you develop over months. And I wanted to, it's now finally coming to the point where this is, I believe, a 12-1. We've got to go to the market. And I waited as long as I could. So, Mr. Kinzinger? Just a moment, please. I'm sorry. 10.
I think it's an excellent idea to look at a broker who will go out and work for you. In every business, that's one of the things you look at. Insurance is a very expensive aspect, and it needs to be reviewed. It doesn't mean you've changed anything. It means you're reviewing it with capable, quality people. I think you have an excellent idea.
Thank you. Any other questions? Since there's no cost, Mr. Legess?
Just to remind the board that if we wouldn't have changed our broker of record on liability, we wouldn't have saved $600,000, and there were people on this board that did not want to change. So I think it's a wise move.
Thank you. Do we have a motion in a second?
Yes.
We did, okay. We have a motion and a second. I guess all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries. I do want to check though, do we need a roll call because there will be commission involved?
Yeah, do a roll call.
We probably should do a roll call. I just want to make sure because we're not spending any more money, but we will be spending money. So we should probably do a roll call.
And those bids will come back before the board.
Yep, the bids will come back before finance committee. I'll probably put together the small insurance team again to take a look at those to help vet and go through it. There's some people on the board here that have great knowledge in this area. Will do us a good service. So then we'll come back to the finance committee as soon as possible. And with that, we may not change, but so roll call, please.
Mr. Tripp?
Aye.
Mr. Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Legess? Mr. Stauffenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Vickery?
Aye.
Mr. Olthoff? Mr. Tholen?
Aye.
Mr. McConnell?
Aye.
Mr. Mulcahy?
Aye.
Mr. Scott?
Aye.
Mr. Snipes?
Aye.
Mr. Byrne?
Aye.
Mr. Seroy?
Aye.
Mr. Lear?
Aye.
Mr. Hildebrand?
Aye.
Mrs. Weber?
Aye.
Mr. Einfeld?
Aye.
Mrs. Peters? Mrs. Evans? Mr. Payton?
Aye.
Mrs. Parker? Ms. Dunbar? Mr. Ritter?
Aye.
Mr. Kinzinger? Mr. Wheeler?
Aye. Motion carries. Under new business, Mr. Leary, you had something?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, United County Councils of Illinois is the association that we belong to, as all of you realize. They hold annual regional meetings on various topics, and at the present time, they are requesting that if any board members have any particular topics they would like to see some educational seminars on, please either contact them directly or you could contact me, because they want to be responsive to the members of the county board as we represent the membership of that organization.
Thank you. And obviously, feed that back to Mr. Lear if you have any direct questions or contributions in that area. So that being said, anything else? Mr. Legess?
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I would like to agree. Mr. Olthoff, second. All those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Have a good day.
I knew we'd agree on something.